stories don't define you. How you tell them will.
Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and Chief Storymaker at Elkins Consulting. In my work with coaching clients, I guide people to improve their communication using storytelling as the foundation of our work together. What I've realized over years of coaching and podcasting is that the majority of people don't realize the impact of the stories they share on their internal messages and on the people they're sharing them with. My work with leaders and people who aspire to be leaders follows a similar path to the interviews on my podcast, uncovering pivotal moments in their lives and learning how to share them to connect more authentically with others, to make their presentations and speaking more engaging, to reveal patterns that have kept them stuck or moved them forward, and to improve their relationships at work and at home. When you're ready to get started collecting your own stories, my book, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, is available in all the regular places, and the audiobook version is now available on Google Play and on my website, elkinsconsulting.com. As a special bonus for listeners, the audiobook includes 2 songs recorded by my band, Spare Change, in my living room in Montana. Keep an eye out for announcements through LinkedIn and via my Elkins Consulting Facebook and Instagram pages, or visit my website, elkinsconsulting.com, to learn more. Also on my website is a free podcast interview checklist. It's available to download to make sure you make the most of your next podcast interview.
It's my pleasure to introduce my friend Marcela Niemeyer. I have asked her to be on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, because she has some really fascinating stories that so clearly define who she is that when she tells them, you cannot help but be enamored and intrigued. So, Marcela, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Sarah.
So I always ask the first question, which is for you to share something about yourself that most people don't know about you. And the reason I ask that question is I really like our listeners to have some context around who you are and kind of what drives you. And I always find that kind of answer, the answer to that question, often can give you great indications into a person's thoughts and personality and motivation. So you have something prepared for me, right?
Yeah, I have something to share. And for the people who don't know me, I work in human resources. I am a global senior HR director. I work here in Baltimore for Laureate. And I really value working with people from different countries, different nationalities, like a lot of different people that can bring different perspectives into the table. And the story I'm going to share with you is back there in 1995, so a while ago. But I think it has a lot to do with who I am and why I value things. So I'm going to share with you a little bit. There's this NGO called CISV. Have you heard about them before?
No, I hadn't heard about them.
Yeah, so basically they are dedicated to educating and inspiring for peace, which is like a very beautiful thing to do. And they do this through the intercultural friendship, cooperation, and understanding. So how does that work? They have people in different countries. I don't know how many they are now, but they are back from 1950s, and they have let's say 60 member associations, in 200 chapters or local groups. And when I was 11 years old, I was chosen to go to Bogota in Colombia. And that was a little dangerous to say, at that time. But it was a program where we would go 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls, and someone that was over 21. And we would spend a month there together with other people from different countries. So not many people know that about me. Some people in Brazil, but it's, very, very old. But I think it's very interesting because imagine they didn't have emails. The communication with my family was, fax and
right, and letters, physical letters.
Just letters. And
postcards.
I spent 1 month there. And also the communication with the people was a challenge because we would speak in English, but we had people from Lebanon, from Japan, from the US, very different countries there. And some people didn't speak English that well. So we had to communicate with them make ourselves understand each other. And there were a lot of activities that we had to trust people. You know, when you have to close your eyes and you have a circle and you have to fall. And
the trust fall. I've done those.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we had to do those type of things. And it was very interesting because we also had like the special nights where each country would present and prepare something. So for example, Brazil, we have a very typical dance called frevo. And we have another game, kind of not a sport, called capoeira. And we would show people how we'll do that. We would prepare some Brazilian food for them, would give like a little booklet to the people about Brazil and telling them about a famous song that we have. And then the US, I think they did hamburgers and potatoes. It was a lot of fun. A lot of fun learning about all those different cultures, different perspectives. And when you think about a war or when you think about something happening in the other side of the world, you think, oh, I had a friend that was from Lebanon, from Turkey, from Spain, you know, so you get this mindset of looking at the different people since you are a kid. So it was a very meaningful experience to be there and start being with all those different people at a very young age.
Right. 11 years old.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
I can't even imagine. I didn't leave the country until I was 19 and I went to Australia where everybody pretty much speaks English. Although I have to tell you, there were times where it didn't sound like English. When I would go to the outback and places, it's kind of like the difference between speaking English in Montana and speaking English in Georgia, like sometimes, or West Virginia. What was that?
How did you feel there besides the language?
You know, it just felt like an adventure to me. And because everyone spoke English, it didn't feel as challenging, I guess, as it did when I traveled to other countries later on in life where I didn't speak the language. It's an interesting question. That's something I'll have to think about more because I'm always the one asking the questions. But I have lots of Australia stories that were interesting. Like I remember getting down there and a lot of us that we were Americans from Colorado State University, and we'd go into the bathroom that first night and flush the toilet because we were told that the toilet flushes the other direction, like the water goes counterclockwise instead of clockwise or whatever, because you're on the southern hemisphere and the other side of the world. But of course, it's just silly, all those little things that you think about when you're a kid and you go somewhere else and you have to test it out. But by the way, their toilets flushed straight down. So there was no sort of whirlpool. It didn't matter.
Everyone knows about it.
Yes, I do remember some interesting language issues. Like in Australia, a glass of beer that you might order is actually a pot of beer. And I remember ordering beer and then people saying it's a pot of beer. And I remember asking where the restroom was or the bathroom, and they would say, well, the toilet, it's over there. Because they don't talk about the restroom or the bathroom. They talk about the toilet because that's what it is. And and there were a couple of hard ones like route, you know, you're rooting for the team. That was apparently when you root in Australia, you're having sex.
My God.
And I remember telling somebody about my former roommate and how she was a huge fan of the Denver Broncos and she would root for the team every Sunday or whatever, every Monday Night Football. And I remember the boys all, you know, their eyes popped out of their heads. And one of them actually said, the whole team? I remember.
And I found out, maybe I'm saying something that
That's when I realized I was in trouble because I said, well, of course you can't root for just one. And of course. So the girls in the group were really appalled. They, you know, and Americans have a reputation for being cheap and easy. And I just, you know, dove right into that stereotype. So it was pretty funny. But our language issues were different from 11-year-old language issues, I would hope. Yeah. So tell me, I'm so curious about this. So Brazilians speak Portuguese, right?
Correct. Yes.
But it's a different Portuguese from the Portuguese that people speak in Portugal.
It's very different. And you know what's funny? My mom, she lives in Portugal now.
Oh.
Yeah, for a few years. Yeah. In 2014, she moved to Switzerland, and then she spent a few years there, and then now she's in Portugal. And many times she tells us, hey, this is how they say it. And it's funny because it's so different.
It is like Spanish in Spain versus Spanish in Mexico, or
Exactly.
there are lots of differences that, but you grew up in Brazil speaking Portuguese, but you also spoke English. And then you went to spend a month in Colombia.
Yeah,
right?
So we went to spend a month in Colombia for this CISV organization.
Mm-hmm.
And this was something for, to get to know other people, other culture. And it was a program that we were enrolled, which I thought was like very nice because I used to travel to Germany and other places with my family, but more like, oh, let's have vacation, let's spend like 2 weeks somewhere, and get to know other cultures and other people. But this one was like a special program, and my mom wanted us to do it. My sister, I think she went to Denmark, and my brother to the US.
Wow. That sounds like such an amazing program. And what you're doing when you bring 11-year-olds together all in one place where you all have to learn to talk to each other and learn about each other's cultures, not only does it give you a vision and an understanding that there are humans that are just like you, that are living in other places. So when you hear those places in the news, it's not just some faraway land, it's something you have a connection to. But on top of that, you're creating these amazing ambassadors because each child now knows people from all over the world. And if they hear something derogatory about people from Germany or people from the US, they have a different image. They can say, no, that's not true. I met somebody from Germany and he was this and that. And so you're building these relationships across all these cultures and geographical barriers. And I just find that to be outstanding. I wish that I had seen programs like that when I was a kid. I would have been all over it.
It was really amazing. And today I work in a global role. And I think that helped me a lot because since I was a kid, I was always looking at people with different eyes and saying, people that are different from me because they are from other countries, because they are older or they are younger, or because they are, they have another sexual preference, like everything. Those are the people I want to connect. Because if I connect to people that are like me, what am I going to learn? Okay, I always learn something from everyone. But I think I learn more when I have people that have different backgrounds, different stories, different experiences, and they think different than me. And I had that since I was a kid because of this experience. And that helped me a lot at work as well, at work and life.
Well, it makes your life richer. It simply makes it richer. It also makes it so that the relationships already in your life become richer because you have this other perspective. So I'm guessing that even your relationships with your family shifted after that because of that experience.
Exactly. I think you learn to listen more to people, and not focusing only on yourself, but focusing on the other ones.
And remove judgment to a certain extent because you have to listen. And exactly. I don't think you can listen effectively if you're judging.
Exactly. And many people, they judge others, right? They're like, oh, they're from this country, and they simply don't know it.
Right. I see that a lot of stereotypes and ideas about what a person is like. That's one of the things I get really frustrated with is that whole generalizing about all people are this or all Americans are this or all Jewish people are this or all Europeans are this. And it just, every time I hear that, it just infuriates me. I remember when I was getting ready to go to Paris, we were going to go explore Paris for the first time. I hadn't been to France before. And I remember a couple of people here in Montana, a lot of the people that I surround myself with have traveled a lot, but there are a lot of people here in Montana that never left Montana or leave it very rarely. And they really prefer just to stay right here. And a couple of them said things like, oh, yeah, people in Paris are so rude. Or I heard that French people are blah, blah, blah. And I would say, oh, well, have you ever been in New Jersey? And they would kind of look at me puzzled. And I'd say, people in New Jersey are really rude. And they said, no, I know somebody from New Jersey. I'm like, oh, an individual from New Jersey that's not rude. That's amazing. So maybe Paris has that reputation because of certain individuals. That doesn't make the whole city like that. And
yeah, you can't generalize.
no, it's silly. It's silly. I can tell you that in the entire time that I was in Paris, I had one rude experience. And as soon as we got through customs, we were going through customs in New Jersey. And I can tell you, there were a lot more rude people in customs in New Jersey than anything I experienced in France. So, those reputations always kind of grate on me. But enough about me. So, Marcela, our first conversation, I asked you about something that you did that you found satisfying. And you talked about putting together a multi-100-part bicycle, stationary bike that you had ordered.
That was just because of the pandemic.
Right. But you did it. And you had these hundreds of parts. You're not a mechanic or an engineer. And but you knew that if you just followed the instructions step by step, that eventually you would end up with this put together bicycle. And I loved your story because it spoke volumes about where you find your satisfaction, where you derive your satisfaction and what motivates you. And then I saw this story about deciding to go and spend a year in Rhode Island as a high school senior. You're a senior, right?
Senior, yes, correct.
A high school senior. And I love hearing adventure stories like this. This was particularly thoughtful in the way that you presented it to me. So first of all, for our listeners, what made you decide on that particular location?
Yeah, so I was thinking about what I wanted to do and what I wanted to study. And I saw that many people from Brazil, they would go to the US, they would find a family, a host family, and they would stay with them and go to a public school. And I was thinking, I want to find a school that I'll be challenged. And I want to be still learning. And people are like, oh, but those schools we go, they're very easy. And we just go party every day. And we don't study a lot. We just spend a year just getting to know people and getting parties. And the schools was, they were really easy. And I want a school that is very strong because I want to keep studying. I want to keep up with my studies. So I started looking at different boarding schools. I have two cousins who are Americans. They are both in California now. One used to live in New York and in Boston, but now they're both there. And I asked them, where are the boarding schools? Which are the boarding schools? And I started to look at them and see what their values were, what their principles. I didn't want to go to a school where they would have a lot of Brazilians. Because if I live in Brazil, I'm there with the Brazilians. If I go to the US, I want to learn English. I want to improve my English. I was like 16, 17 years old. And I wanted to live the culture. So I knew that if I would go to a place where you have many Brazilians, I would be with them all the time. So I was looking for a school that would have more Americans, but also other people from other countries. So my best friends there were from Germany. My roommate was from Thailand. So also seeking for this diversity, but a lot of Americans as well that were there for the 4 years. And that a boarding school would be a very different experience for me, like living inside of the school and getting closer to the faculties. Because the faculties, they were faculties, but they were also accountable for sports. And I know how big it is, to play a sport in the US. And I really wanted to start something and, be part of a team and a team player. So I thought that Rhode Island would be very nice and would be a great location. And the school was great. And I decided, I applied, of course. You always apply to those.
Right, of course.
A lot of paperwork, right?
So you got there and it was really hard. and you were miserable for a little while. Like
Yes, I was.
miserable. Your
I must
grades weren't
confess.
good. You were crying every night. What happened when you talked to your dad?
Yeah, so this is this is the point. I was like, oh my God, I can't stay here for a year. I just want to stay 6 months. I want to go back to my family. I want to go back to Brazil. It's too much. I'm failing, I can't do cross country. My grades are very bad. And he said, no, you are not coming back. You are staying for a year. And then I said, oh my God, what do I do now? I have no other choice, right?
Right.
So I had to find all the strength and say, I'm going to overcome this. I'm going to learn from this. And what are the things that I can do? Because cross country, there was the group of the great people. They were like the first group. And then the second group of the people that, they were there. They were, okay, doing a good job. And then like far away, coming like the last one. And
because you had never done cross country. You were a swimmer.
Yes, I was always swimming and I was good at swimming, the long distance. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm going to do swimming. And they said to me, no, swimming is just for the winter. And we are in the fall. You got to choose something else. And I had no idea. I said, okay, cross country. I'm going to try something new. And I didn't think I was going to be the first one, but I thought at least I would be with the second group. And I was always the last one and no one was paying attention to me. And I was very frustrated and I barely had friends. Who was I going to talk to? To call my parents, you had to use those cards, remember?
Right, I remember those calling cards.
Yeah, I mean, we had emails. Email was something that was like pretty new, couple of years. But to call them was really hard. It's not like today with FaceTime and Zoom and everything, you can just give a quick call.
Right.
So I was feeling miserable.
Wow. Well, so you told me this story and you told me the story about the bicycle. And then I love the story about you decided you really wanted to get a job where you had to speak Spanish. And so you learned Spanish because that's what you wanted. And then our listeners know that I'm a StrengthsFinder coach. And so I often bring this back to your natural instinctive talents. And looking at your talents, I'm listening to your stories and just chuckling because for our listeners, she has achiever. Marcela, you have achiever as your number 6 strength, which is, as far as I'm concerned, that's in the top strengths. Typically, we look at 1 through 5, but I always look all the way up to 8 or 9. But number 6 is achiever, which means once you set a goal, you're going to meet that goal. You will absolutely meet that goal. And achievers are the ones like you, where you generally, like when you were in Brazil, you were at top of the class, you were a top athlete. You're one of those people that when people read your bio, they go, oh, she does everything, right?
Yes.
And then you move to Rhode Island and you have to start from scratch. Your grades aren't like, you're not at the top of your class. You're not the best or even the top athlete in the group. And all of a sudden, all of your natural desires and motivation to be the best and be really good at things are in the toilet. They're just the lowest they could possibly be. And when I was trained in StrengthsFinder, we talked about the balcony in the basement of your strengths, and you're in the balcony when you are using the strengths effectively, and you're in the basement when when you can't use your strengths or when you're using them at a detriment to the people and relationships in your life. And so you moved to Rhode Island and you were really in the basement of your strengths. And you also have command in your top strengths, which is this impulse to lead when you see floundering going on around you. So if you perceive a lack of leadership in a room, you cannot help yourself. You have this urge to just insert yourself to organize and to help people move forward. And add that with your activator, which means that you don't wait. You just dive in. It's what you do. And all of those came together, even at 16 years old, to get you through that moment and find your resilience and find your courage. And you did it. So my next question is, you get home. Do you remember coming home? Do you remember arriving at the airport and your family picking you up?
In Brazil,
after your year. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what happened is that my mom and my dad, they came to my graduation.
Oh, so they came to Rhode Island for you.
Yeah, they came. And then I graduated. I finally made it. Of course, I had to shift my mindset and, learn from the failures and be resilient, as you mentioned. And the more obstacles I was getting, I was like, okay, I got this one. What's the next one? Because then I learned how to overcome. But then I was coming back with them to Brazil.
And what was it like arriving? Because I know most exchange students really struggle for the first few weeks or months with kind of a culture shock of coming back. But because where you were, a lot of those people traveled, I don't know, maybe it wasn't as much of a culture shock, but how did that feel coming back?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And for me, it was not, because I had lived all of those things, like being a failure, having a C+ grade and all of those things that I never had the chance to live in my life. And today I see, and I think it's really important because it shaped who I am and how persistent I am. But I just felt calm when I came back because I said, I accomplished that. And if it was not for my father saying, you never give up in life, he knew I had that inside of me. And I was a little bit, suffering because as a type A, and as you said, as an achiever, it's really hard when it's the first time that you are seeing all those things happening. And my father was sick, and he was like in the hospital, and he went there to see me, to be proud of seeing his daughter graduating, and he passed away right after, like it was 6 months later. But he went there, he was with me, he was proud. So I always have this good memory of him and my mom being with me and seeing what I have achieved.
So when he told you you can't come home, were you angry with him?
Yes, I was angry. I was crying. I was like, why is this happening to me? I couldn't understand.
Why he would say no. Don't you want me to come home? Don't you miss me?
Exactly. I was like, why is he saying that? And I couldn't understand. And now when I look back, I see that I needed this. I needed to, suffer when I was little.
Struggle.
And struggle so that all the challenges that will come later in my life, I would have shaped my mindset on how to deal with those. And many other challenges came. And I think the universe keeps sending me challenges because this is the way I operate. Every time I have a challenge, I say, okay, this is coming to me. I'm going to solve it. And then it's like a fool. You get all the energy to go through that. The pandemic for me, I think I did a lot of things on self-development. I read a lot of books and connected with a lot of different people. So now I always take advantage of the challenging situations where everyone is struggling to do other things and shift my mindset and be resilient. We can.
Yes. Your dad, it's kind of magical when our parents or somebody that is someone we respect and admire is so thoughtful about what our needs are when we can't really think about it for ourselves because we're not in that place. And I keep coming back to your dad saying, no, you can't come home, knowing that it was better for you to learn these skills at 16, 17 than for you to face them for the first time at 24, 26.
Exactly.
And I'm a big believer in that. You have to let your children experience these things, encourage them to experience the struggle and the sense of courage and resilience that you can when they still have the support network of their family. At 16, you knew you still had them. You knew you would go home eventually. But if you were 24, 26 and that had happened, you would probably feel more adrift, more lonely. So that was the first thought that popped into my head. The other beauty of what your father did was that as a parent now, I promise you that it was everything in him to say those words to you. It absolutely broke his heart to tell you, crying on the phone, that you had to stay. he probably got off the phone and collapsed because it broke his heart to hear you crying, and he knew what he had to do. He had to tell you to stay.
Exactly.
Oh, I just like my eyes just filled with tears because I know what that's like as a parent to say, I'm sorry, I can't bail you out right now. You need to experience this. You need to grow from this. And it's one of those, this hurts me more than it hurts you, that you hear parents say. But it really, it did hurt you. But I can tell you that as a parent, the beauty of what he did was he allowed himself to be vulnerable and to sacrifice his own needs and emotion because he knew what it would bring to your life. And that's just an amazing gift.
Exactly.
Really an amazing gift.
An amazing gift when we reflect back.
Yes, but at the time it doesn't feel like a gift. And
no, it doesn't.
when I was a freshman in college, I was going from Fort Collins to Colorado Springs, which back then was a good full 2-hour drive over the holiday break, the winter break. And I was driving back in my little VW Bug and my stuff, because I was going to be home for about 4 weeks. And I hit ice and did a big 360 circle on the highway. And car went into the ditch on the side of the road and was just missed a big 4x4 signpost. So I didn't wreck my car, but because I hit the ditch hard enough, my right front tire went flat. It just popped it, although there were no holes in it. Just
oh my God, Sarah.
Completely deflated. Yeah. And of course I was really upset. And luckily there was a police officer right on the on-ramp, and he saw what happened and he pulled over and he gave me a ride to the next gas station so I could make some calls. Of course, this is 1989 or something, 1988. So there weren't cell phones. Some wealthy people had car phones back then, but nobody had cell phones.
Wow.
And so I went to the gas station, and just like you, I had to use my calling card because I didn't have cash. I didn't have a bunch of coins put in.
Oh my God, us and the calling cards.
Yes. And I called my dad, who was an hour and a half away in a blizzard, right? And over another mountain pass between Colorado Springs and Denver. And I called him up and I'm bawling, I'm sniffling. There's, snot coming out of my nose and I'm wiping it off and tears are streaming down my face. And the police officer had been really mean to me. Like, he was just not very kind when this happened. And so my ego was bruised on top of my frustration with being stuck where I was.
Imagine how you felt.
What was that?
I imagine how you felt.
Yes, it was awful. I was 18, freshman in college. So I'm bawling. I call my dad, and the first thing out of his mouth wasn't, "Are you okay?" He said, "First, is the car okay?" And I said, "I guess so. It's not wrecked." And he's like, "Okay." And then he said, "Why are you calling me?" And I said, "Because I had an accident. My car is stuck in a ditch." And he said, "Call AAA. That's why we have a membership for this auto club, so they can tow you and fix the tire. Like, call AAA. Why are you calling me? I'm an hour and a half away. I can't help you." And I remember immediately getting myself together. I remember this immediate, tears just stopped, just dried up. I wiped my nose with my sleeve and got myself together. And I said, "Okay." Got off the phone and picked it back up and called AAA. And of course, first thing out of her mouth, the dispatcher says, "Are you okay? Are you in a safe place?" I'm like, oh, she cares more than my dad. But looking back, as I was talking about your dad's sacrifice in telling you couldn't come home, even though he knew he was sick and wasn't going to be around.
Yeah.
He sacrificed this moment. And I remember years later looking back at my situation with my dad, which was minor compared to what you experienced. But I remember now I look back and think, oh my gosh, that must have been so hard for him, because
it was very hard for him to say that.
Yeah, he was afraid for me. Mm-hmm. And he was worried about me, but he also knew that I was going to have to be resourceful. I was an adult. I had to find and that, if nothing else, my father taught me to be resourceful. So as I'm thinking about your father, it's reminding me of my father that I lost about 6 years ago. So that's why it's bringing up so many strong memories. And what a beautiful story you shared.
Yeah, I liked your story too. And we have things in common.
Of course we do. Of course we do.
Yeah.
So one more story. You sent me kind of a list of some of your ideas for stories. Is there one that stands out for you that you would like listeners to leave with, to understand you? Now, just for our listeners' sake, I will have a link to the LinkedIn profile page for Marcela. So please feel free to connect with her. Her HR expertise is really extraordinary. So if you follow her, you'll find some great content and resources. But of all the stories that are in that list, what's one that you would want our listeners to remember?
Yeah, I think I would like to talk about Linda Gueses when I worked there, because I remember when I was interviewing, they said, we need someone that is fluent in Spanish. You know, in HR, they have this job description and they always want like the perfect person with this and that and that. It's, you know, always like that. And it was a regional role to work for South America. And I came from Ford Motor Company. I worked at a bank before and more in other roles that were more related to Brazil. And they wanted, of course, someone that would speak Spanish. And people say, oh, Spanish is easy. It's similar to Portuguese. You can learn it. But it's not like that, because when you have to travel 50% of your time and go to the different countries, we're managing like 3,000 employees for the region and always doing like train the trainers. We did the SAP talent management implementation and everything.
Wow.
Spanish. My manager was in Colombia, Bogota. I had people in Argentina, Chile, like Peru, Venezuela, and I had to speak to them all the time in Spanish. So when I was interviewing, I said, guys, I really like that job and the offer, and I don't have the Spanish, but if you hire me, I will learn. And then, Sarah, everyone looks at my LinkedIn and they say, oh, she's global. She's very successful. She has had all the opportunities in her life. So it seems like it's easy, right? Oh, she moved to the US. She has a global role. So everyone thinks, oh, no, it's really easy. She just got the great opportunities and that's why she's there. But to tell you the truth, it's not like that. I started to learn Spanish, and because I was traveling 50% of the time, I couldn't have a fixed schedule, let's say every Monday and Wednesday at 6 p.m. No, because I was traveling. So what I was doing, I was not going out all the weekends with my friends and my family. I was sacrificing some other things from my personal life because I was very focused and I wanted to learn Spanish and I wanted to do a great job. So I would wake up like super early, have Spanish classes at 6:30 a.m., like during holidays. And I remember myself studying because I had to do a presentation. It was through Zoom at the time. And it was for all the HR heads in the regions. It was a training about the client survey tool. And I got all the English papers with everything I had to speak. And I was with my professor, my Spanish professor, during the weekend, putting all my notes together and prepping because I wanted to do a good job. I said, they gave me the opportunity. They believed in me. And even my manager put me to talk to all the CFOs and do a presentation. He said, I got to do a good job. And I was putting an effort into it. You know, nothing was easy in my life. Nothing came easily, as people say, but we need to put a lot of effort and say, focus on that and we'll get there. And don't get frustrated because you don't learn in 2 months or 3 months. And I had that experience before from Newport, Rhode Island, when I was getting frustrated with things and I learned how to overcome. So I was like, okay, I want this challenge and I'm going to do it.
Yes. I agree. I think a lot of people underestimate what it takes to be where someone is. And when somebody makes it look effortless, my friend Tom Dietzler just wrote a post about how certain people can make things look effortless, and it makes us often misunderstand or underestimate, undervalue the work that went into creating something that looks effortless. And so I think that that's a great message for listeners. When you see somebody's expertise and their experiences, and you think, well, they must have had better opportunities than I have. Think about the fact that these people made these opportunities happen. They chose them. I just had a conversation with this amazing woman, Desiree Adaway, who made things happen for herself. She wasn't given these opportunities. They didn't land in her lap. She had to place her lap in the right place for it to get there. And I would really encourage listeners to look at those things as how they made it happen. And there are certainly people who have good luck, who are born into families that they have certain opportunities given to them that other people might not have access to. But I would say that is a small minority. It's certainly not the majority of the people that I've talked to on my podcast. So it's a great lesson, great reminder.
Yeah, not for me. Like, even to come to the US and work for Laureate in this global position where I am, I had to go through 14 interviews. I had
14.
14. And I was already employed by Laureate in Brazil for like almost 4 years. And I had to go through those 14 interviews. I had to fly on one day, come here, go to the hotel, sleep, wake up, go do the other interviews that were missing, the final ones, face to face. And then at the same day at 4 p.m., head to the airport and fly back to Brazil.
That's exhausting.
Yeah. And I was like, everyone knows me. I have been, doing a good job here in Brazil. They know me. Why do I need 14 interviews? So
that's a good question.
It's, it's easy. You worked and then you were invited to come to the US. No, it's not like that. There's always a challenge, and we create the opportunities, as you said, right?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Well, I am so glad to know you, Marcela. Really, when I saw your strengths, I thought, okay, this explains a lot. This woman is a force of nature.
Well, thank you for your words.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. The book of the same title is now available, and the audiobook version will be released in November 2020. If you're ready to uncover your stories and learn to uncover the stories of the people around you to create stronger connections and healthier communities, visit elkinsconsulting.com. And while you're visiting the website, you can learn more about the book and the work we do to improve communication among teams and through our one-to-one coaching. Thank you.
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away?